Good afternoon and thanks for joining us. I'm Mackailyn Johnson. It's a historic day as a new justice is sworn into the U.S. Supreme Court. Plus, a Pine Bluff City Councilwoman tells us how she tracked down one of the men who held her at gunpoint over the weekend. Her story in 2 minutes.
Hundreds of tiny lit flying machines are taking to the sky this 4th of July holiday. I'm Danya Backus with a look at why cities are replacing fireworks with drone light shows.
And Taco Bell is testing a new menu item made with a familiar cheesy snack. The details just ahead. But first, we're here with meteorologist Nathan Scott with the H word that I don't like to hear. It's humid again. I don't like it.
We could be 3 H's, Mackailyn. How about humid, hot, and possibly even hazy out there? Look behind you. You see the visibility is not as good as what we have been seeing with the past 4 days, and that's because it's back. The moisture from the Gulf of Mexico, you step outside, it's starting to feel pretty soupy out there. And not only that, but we're off to the races in the temperature department. Already 90 degrees at Conway and Clinton, 89 in the capital city, 88 in Arkadelphia. Some clouds moving into southeastern parts of the state. The radar is quiet right now, but going through the course of the day, there's going to be the small chance 1 or 2 places could see a stray cooling shower or maybe a storm. Most of us will stay dry. Look at your dew point map though. Barney Purple buying up a lot of real estate as those dew points climb back up into those miserable 70-degree temperatures. And the wind, it's pretty light, so really no relief there. Your feels like number already feels like 97 in Pine Bluff. It feels like 97 in Arkadelphia. Here's your forecast today. Highs, low 90s across the board with that mixture of sun and clouds. Small chance of a stray shower. Going into the weekend, the heat and humidity remain in place with just a small uptick in that chance of a pop-up shower storm. I'll have more details on that coming up.
Thanks, Nathan. And new at noon, a historic day in Washington as Kentaji Brown Jackson is sworn in as the new U.S. Supreme Court Justice. She replaces 83-year-old Justice Stephen Breyer as the court wraps up its last rulings of the term today. Justice Jackson is the first black woman to serve on the nation's highest court and brings experience as a former federal public defender. And with her swearing in, there will be 4 women on the Supreme Court for the next term, a first that has been championed by advocates pushing for more diversity at the top of the nation's judiciary system. The historic moment comes as the U.S. Supreme Court wraps up its term, releasing its final decisions today, including a big one on the environment. The court sided with a group of Republican-led states and coal mining companies in a decision that could have broad implications for how the Biden administration moves forward in fighting climate change. Skylar Henry has the latest from Washington.
The Supreme Court has ruled to limit the Environmental Protection Agency's power to regulate greenhouse gas emissions. The court's conservative majority sided with the coal industry and a group of Republican-led states, saying the EPA exceeded its authority by trying to limit power plant pollution under the Clean Air Act. Writing for the 6-3 majority opinion, Chief Justice John Roberts said Congress didn't give the EPA the authority to devise emissions caps. American University professor William Snape says the ruling could significantly limit the Biden administration's climate strategy.
What would be the implications of that?
Well, it would just put sideboards and side guards as to what the Biden administration could do with its EPA. I don't think it would be the end of climate regulation.
Snape thinks ultimately momentum is on the side of clean energy.
I personally think that we are seeing, from a historic perspective, the last dying gasps of the coal industry, the oil industry, and to a lesser extent the natural gas industry.
The Supreme Court decision comes as a blow to the Biden administration's climate agenda, just days after the president repeated his support for renewable energy. The Biden administration's goal is for the entire U.S. power grid to be running on clean energy by 2035. Leaning on renewable sources such as wind turbines.
It can produce as much energy as a coal mine.
The 3 liberal justices dissented, with Justice Elena Kagan writing that the court has stripped the EPA of its power to respond to the most pressing environmental challenge of our time. Skylar Henry, CBS News, the Supreme Court.
The historic moment comes as the U.S. Supreme Court wraps up its term, releasing its final decisions today, including a big one on the environment. The court sided with the Republican late-steads and coal mining companies in a decision that could have broad implications for how the Biden administration moves forward. The Supreme Court also cleared the way for the Biden administration to end the so-called Remain in Mexico policy, a program first implemented under President Donald Trump that required asylum seekers to await their court hearings outside the U.S. and a 5-4 opinion written by Chief Justice John Roberts, the High Court rejected arguments by Republican-led states seeking to force officials to keep the policy. And meanwhile, emotions are still running high for many people after the U.S. Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade this past Friday. This comes as police dispersed pro-choice protesters Wednesday at 7th and Chester in Little Rock. Protesters were at the Little Rock Central Fire Station holding up signs and chanting while forming a line across the road. They later returned to the Capitol and continued their demonstration. President Biden called on the Senate to make an exception to its filibuster rules to allow Congress to codify abortion protections and privacy rights previously afforded under Roe v. Wade, the landmark decision overturned by the Supreme Court last week. The president voiced his support for temporarily changing Senate rules, something he generally opposes, during a press conference following a NATO summit in Madrid. A Pine Bluff City Councilwoman is shaken up but grateful to be alive after being robbed at gunpoint, and the whole ordeal is captured on camera. The armed robbery happened right outside of her home. THV 11's Frederick Price traveled to Pine Bluff with how she tracked down her assailant.
Yeah, at around 5 o'clock Sunday morning, Joni Alexander says her and her cousin were in her driveway just talking. Well, that conversation was cut short after Alexander turned around and saw 3 men coming from this sidewalk with guns pointed at her.
So they started at my tree, and then they start walking kind of on this line here.
Take a look at this home surveillance video. You can see 3 men approaching Joni Alexander's front porch. Seconds later, this. The men, guns drawn, walk up to her.
And he told me to shut up, and I shut up. And he approached me with the gun pointing at me, and he took my purse.
Shortly after, the suspects run away and begin to shoot in the air. Alexander was able to track her phone to a nearby house on Chestnut Street.
And it's a young man sitting on the porch with no shirt on. Well, one of the guys who robbed me did not have on a shirt. So my husband looks at the young man and looks at his shoes, and he calls the police over there. And he's like, hey, those are the same shoes.
Police arrested 30-year-old Rodney Whitmore. Witnesses reportedly saw him with a black purse and a handgun. This is what's left of Alexander's belongings.
But they burned the purse, they burned everything in it. My cell phone was torn into 2.
She adds the area where Whitmore was found is an area often plagued with violence.
A lot of the young women are harboring fugitives, you know, so those are their houses that the guys are running to.
Alexander still trying to grasp what happened.
They had the manpower to completely destroy my life.
Is calling on the community to hold criminals accountable.
Quit giving these young boys who have already made up their minds that they're for the streets an excuse, because all they're doing is victimizing the very people who are out here advocating for them.
In Pine Bluff, Frederick Price, THV 11 News.
Whitmore is charged with aggravated robbery and theft of property. Police are still searching for the other 2 men involved. According to a police report, Whitmore said he didn't know the names of the other 2 men. And also new today, police in Jacksonville make an arrest in a deadly shooting we told you about earlier this month. 51-year-old Joseph Richards is now behind bars for first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. A judge set his bond at $500,000. Police identified Richards in the death of 75-year-old Charles Parliament 2 Fridays ago. The family of Emmett Till is demanding an arrest after an unserved warrant is found 66 years later. That warrant charged Carolyn Bryant Donham in his 1955 kidnapping. Till was killed after Bryant, a white woman, said he whistled at her and touched her in a Mississippi store. Years later, the woman reportedly changed her story, saying the incident never happened. Today, relatives of Till want authorities to arrest Bryant, who at the time of his slaying was married to one of 2 white men that were tried and acquitted weeks later. Former R&B superstar R. Kelly will likely spend much of the rest of his life behind bars after a federal judge sentenced the 55-year-old to 30 years in prison for racketeering and sex trafficking. Some of his victims say they weren't sure justice would ever be served, but the ruling renewed their faith in the judicial system. Kelly's legal team plans to appeal his conviction. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell is warning that there's no guarantee the central bank can tame inflation without hurting the U.S. job market. Powell said he's still hoping the economy will make a so-called soft landing. He and others are aiming for that by raising interest rates enough to tamp down inflation, but without causing a recession and increasing the jobless rate. Powell says Russia's war on Ukraine has made that a more difficult task. And the Biden administration is purchasing more than 100 million doses of Pfizer's vaccine for a possible booster campaign this fall. The $3.2 billion deal includes shots for both adults and children and gives the White House the option to buy hundreds of millions of additional doses if necessary. In a story we first brought you yesterday, U.S. Labor Secretary Marty Walsh came to Little Rock Wednesday. He got together with Mayor Frank Scott Jr. and leaders from the Little Rock Chamber of Commerce for a roundtable discussion at Philander Smith College. The secretary's visit builds off of the Department of Labor's Good Jobs Initiative, which is the Biden administration's effort to improve job quality.
What they should be doing is continue to increase salaries and opportunities for whether it's better productivity, better opportunity, and growth of their own company. So when a company is successful and their workers are happy and successful, then that's good for the company and good for the region.
Secretary Walsh also announcing a department grant to support the re-entry and training of formerly incarcerated people into the workforce. This grant hopes to improve coordination between key partners in the re-entry process. Are drones the future of 4th of July celebrations? The answer when the news at noon returns. Nathan?
The moisture has made its way back here into the natural state. You can feel it out there today, and that's going to be the story going into the weekend. Hot, humid conditions along with it, a chance of a pop-up shower storm. I'll have that weekend forecast coming up.